that's I'm sure that's good news to a lot of people. In terms of labor, would you need a different kind of labor force? Would you need more workers? Or could you do it with the labor force that you have already?
Oh, no, I think there's job creation coming.
Any possibility percentage growth in terms of the labor force?
Hard to know, but they say, for example, that currently of the construction work in Hawaii today, 15% of it is based on solar. So, I mean, this is big stuff. I mean, if 15% of our construction business is solar energy, then there's lots of jobs with this out there. I think if, it'll take people to run a plant. If we end up with biofuels, it'll be mechanized farming, so it's not stoop labor, but there will be labor involved in that. The more distributed generation you have, solar, wind, or other kinds of renewable energy, there's a whole group of people that have to install and then maintain those pieces of equipment. I mean, it isn't just something you put on a roof and walk away from. We want those units to last 20, 30 years, so they need to be maintained.
They would require maintenance.
Exactly. So, as opposed to, a few big units, the more we distribute out, the more opportunities there are for job and for job growth. Some of it will take training, and I think there's some of that underway right now at the community colleges and others. The solar industry has just grown by leaps and bounds over the past few years, and they've been hiring people right and left. And I think most of the companies train their own folks, but I think there are training programs now being offered through community colleges. Some of what's coming is likely to be fairly sophisticated in the operation of plants. The folks who will run the geothermal plants of the future and the biomass plants of the future, that's a sophisticated piece of business. And, I would hope that we would be able to train our own folks, Hawaii folks, to take those jobs. But that's got to be one of the things we look at in the coming years is, are we getting training ready so it's our people who fulfill the renewable or fill the renewable energy jobs, not us importing people to run those kind of plants.
Right.
I mean, we may need expertise to start them, to get them going, but once they're going, we should be able to do that work.
What about the reliance of neighbor island sources to power the guzzling Oahu, which requires a lot of power?
Oahu is the industrial center for the state, so it has big harbors, the refineries, the industrial center of Hawaii, and the largest tourist center, Waikiki, which funds a lot of the state, are all on this island. And, it's kind of, you choose whether you live in this urban center, which Oahu really is, or whether you choose the more rural lifestyle of a neighbor island. I think the reality is the neighbor islands have sources of energy. Oahu doesn't. Geothermal basically exists on younger islands where there's still live or relatively recent dormant volcanoes. I mean, that's where we're going to get the geothermal from. So by definition, Kauai and Oahu are kind of out of it. And it's Maui maybe and Big Island. And so a lot depends on how you look at it, how you frame it. I think currently the leadership on Maui and the Big Island are kind of looking at themselves and saying, we could export energy. I mean, we can build up employment sources on our island to create renewable power that we would then essentially sell to Oahu. The big thing that Oahu brings to that equation is a large rate base. So if you live on a neighbor island, you are paying very high rates for electricity.
Right.
Part of that is there are very few people on the island to support the system. So the Big Island is huge. I mean, literally, it is a big island. You fit all the other islands on it. It has a relatively small population. They pay a lot to support a huge infrastructure of wires running around that island with very few people to pay for it, which is why the rates are so high. If we linked our islands together with a cable and went to one statewide rate structure,
You think it would even out?
Well, their rates would drop dramatically, along with the economic development on their island of selling power. That's how the two current mayors see it, Arakawa and Kenoi. There are people who say, well, why should we help Oahu? Mm-hmm. They use too much power and we don't. It's sort of it's the old, how do you view it? Do you view this as a negative? because we're being asked to create power that Oahu would use? Or do you look at that and say, one, it's a huge opportunity for economic development on the neighbor islands, which doesn't necessarily involve that many people, so we're not talking about shifting the population from Oahu to the neighbor islands. And secondly, at that point, Oahu would owe the neighbor islands their rate, the power of their rate base to lower their costs. So I personally think it's a positive exchange. I know there are people who see it differently, but it would also allow us as a state, us as a place, to largely get off oil. And that, for the future of these islands, for our kids, would, to me, be one of the greatest things we could ever do, is detach from this dependence on overseas oil, which there's no good, I mean, there's nothing right about that. You know, it pollutes, it comes from dangerous places, it fuels wars right now that our kids end up going and fighting. I mean, I don't see anything positive about it, that we should want to stay on that as opposed to go to renewable.
Okay, very good. Anything else you'd like to say about this?
One of the things that I think it's important to understand about Hawaiian Electric is we really don't make any money by virtue of being on oil. I mean, whatever the oil costs are, we simply pass them through to our customers. We don't make any money or profit off of that. So for us, switching to renewable energy doesn't come at a price tag in terms of our bottom line. It's the same for us. What's different for us is just as you were saying earlier, it gives us an opportunity to control our own destiny, to have sources and prices that we can rely on.
The local population to support their destiny?
Right. Yeah, that at that point we know where our power is coming from. It's coming from our islands. We know what it's going to cost because this stuff, again, is either fixed or free cost energy, and then, you know, the capital cost is like a whole mortgage. I mean, you pay it off over time, but you know what your payments are. So it frees us of all of that. For a company that's operating to bring you energy to your home, being able to know where it's coming from, what its price is going to be, and be able to understand its availability going out over the coming years would be much, much better than this world we live in today, where I can't tell you tomorrow when we go into the market to buy oil what that oil is going to cost, or even if it's going to be available, or if there's going to be a problem with the tanker that brings that from the Middle East to Hawaii. I mean, all of those are issues and risks of the business we have now that if we could switch to local renewable energy, we'd be in great shape. As you pointed out at the very beginning, no matter what, our role will be to move this around. You know, if we could be relieved of that overseas fuel oil price risk and instead be moving around local energy, then we could concentrate on what we actually enjoy the most and do the best with, which is how do we take all these different sources but deliver you a steady state of electricity.
That's a nice thought. And in terms of how much time it will take, can you predict the time?
Actually, we've got 1,000 megawatts worth of renewable projects at some level of either negotiation or implementation.
This is
right
new
now.
sources?
Right. You know, that's a lot. You know, now, you know, it's 1,600 megawatts statewide, and the 1,000, you know, doesn't give us 1,000 worth of power, so we need a lot more than that. But that's a big number. I mean, Hawaii is really moving faster on this scale than probably any place in the world, certainly any place in the United States. And, you know, that's great. I mean, I think this has a real opportunity in Hawaii to reach numbers up to, and depending on geothermal, 100% for electricity. Certainly the Big Island and Maui have a real opportunity to be off of oil within a decade.
Wow.
That's a dream worth chasing.
Okay, very good. Well, that's also economic security.
Absolutely.
Okay. Robbie, thanks very
Sure.
much for your time today.
My pleasure.